celebrate International Women's Day. And I'm sure you all heard the phrase, it's not brain surgery. But do you know what we say? It's not building some complex discounted cash flow valuation model in finance. But jokes aside, neurosurgery is a beautiful and challenging career. We get to operate on patients and really work at the interface of not only life and death, but also trying to preserve quality of life. It's also a field that I nearly wrote off when I was a medical student. I was paralyzed by the statistics, as only 0.3% of doctors become neurosurgeons, and only 5 to 8% of those are women. So I was at like 0.02%. But now, a fifth-year neurosurgery resident at Mass General, I'm so grateful that I pushed through and pursued this path. And I doubt that I'm going to inspire any of you to pivot from, finance or consulting into neurosurgery, but I do think that some of the lessons learned in my field will have applications in your careers as well. And hopefully some of my learnings can help you along the way. So why the hashtag like a girl? 10 years ago, Always, the feminine products company, launched a campaign called Like a Girl. And they asked young girls and teenagers to run like a girl or fight like a girl. And the young boys and girls did this with strength, and they ran as fast as they could. But the teenagers, both boys and girls, mocked the activity and imitated inferior performance. Fighting like a girl or running like a girl. And something happens when we're in our teens, that doing things like a girl becomes an insult. And at this stage, 50% of girls feel paralyzed by the fear of failure. And sadly, this propagates into our careers as well. So the campaign set out to reclaim this power and positivity of doing things like a girl. And today I'd like to share with you some of the superpowers of doing things like a girl. 3 key things I will touch on in this talk are also mentorship, the double bind problem, and these feminine superpowers. So let's go back a little bit to where it all started. I grew up on a small farm in rural Ohio, running around barefoot, playing with all kinds of random animals, cats, dogs, chickens, goats, you name it. I also loved sports, climbing trees. I'd often get minor injuries, but at that time I thought ice was like the cure-all. And here I'm icing probably after a fall from a tree. But a lot changed for me at the time of this photo. I was 14 years old when my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. One that for women at the time, and especially her age in their 40s, was considered a death sentence. It was also a time when my older siblings had moved away, so I had to lean into becoming the emotional glue to hold my family together and really develop the stoicism to shoulder the burden of their emotions. Thankfully, my mother was entered into a clinical trial, and this is for a drug called Robertson that revolutionized care for these women. And seeing her go from being a fragile patient to a healthy survivor is what inspired my career in medicine. And herein lies the importance of mentorship. So in high school, I took anatomy with my teacher is there on the left, joining me at that was my med school graduation. And she saw my love for anatomy and how much I was energized by it, and my love of sports. And she encouraged me to start shadowing the gentleman in the middle, Dr. Yaus. He was an orthopedic surgeon in my town, beloved by all. He had fixed my broken ankle at one point, and he was the first person to show me an operating room. And I was blown away. It was, bright and magnificent, and I was sold. I was like, I'm going to be a surgeon. And I'm going to go to Duke. I mean, look at it. It looks like a castle. It's way warmer weather than Ohio. And it had a good pre-med program. But neither of my parents had gone to college. Everyone in my town pretty much went to state school or community college. And my guidance counselor told me that, you don't really have a chance. Who do you think you are? You're never going to get in. But my anatomy teacher pushed me and encouraged me to shoot my shot. So I applied early decision, having never seen the place or been to North Carolina, and I got in. I wish it was smooth sailing from there, but I had a rude awakening that the academic rigor at Duke was far beyond that of my farm town. And I started failing my tests. And by the end of the semester, I had a couple C's, and the pre-med advisor told me that, medicine might not be in the cards for me, maybe consider a different career. Also then, at that same time, I received a phone call that Dr. Yass had committed suicide. This was my only role model in surgery. And the rumor was that he was losing his vision, and he couldn't envision going on without being able to operate. So I remember being just overwhelmed with this sadness, but also anger. He's a doctor. How could he not recognize the signs of depression? How could he not ask for help? But then as I flew home at the end of the semester, my grade card in hand, I remember fantasizing about the plane going down. And that, at the time, seemed like the easier option than facing my failures. But as I remember Dr. Yaus, in a weird way, his death saved me. I realized that I needed to learn how to ask for help and gain that humility. And so I returned to Duke. I opened up to my friends about this. I got a peer tutor and started turning things around. But I mention this because I think many of us anchor so much of our identity to our careers. Whether you're a surgeon, or for me, whether I was smart. Maybe it's you're a founder and your company's failing. And I used to think that asking for help was a weakness. But more and more every day I see that asking for help is one of the greatest strengths that you can have. So when I returned to Duke, also a lot of me regaining this confidence, regaining my identity, was thanks to this man. This is Dr. Neil Spector. He's a breast oncologist at Duke. And I reached out to him with a cold email because he was studying the same type of cancer that my mom had. And he took me into the lab and taught me all about the science, but we also chatted about the art of medicine and about running. Neil had been a doctor up here at Harvard, and he had run 2 Boston marathons, and it's also where he contracted Lyme disease, which, undiagnosed for many years, destroyed his heart. So 2 years before I met him, he had had a heart transplant. And he dreamed about being able to run another half marathon in the future. So I continued in the lab. My grades started trending back upward, and I applied for a fellowship to continue the research, and Neil wrote me a letter of recommendation. And in it he said, faith is as brilliant as these students I had seen at Harvard Medical School. I was like, wow, this guy is really delusional. At that time, I barely set my sights on state school. As I told you, I was told I'd probably not get into medical school. And he debriefed with me and really helped me reclaim that confidence and that positivity. So down the road, I ended up applying to Harvard and getting in. And I thought, how could I possibly thank this man for his mentorship? Fruit basket probably won't do. So I called Neil up and said, let's run that half marathon. And I was with him every step of the way. And when we crossed the finish line, he broke into tears. And it was such a beautiful gift. Neil passed away a few years after that. And that photo in the middle that I took with my cell phone, his t-shirt says, I got my heart transplant at Duke. And that photo is the close of his book. And he talks about how that race was more important than all the Boston marathons. And then in the inscription to me, he noted that, first I realized you would claim how much I've shaped your life, however you profoundly impacted mine. The zeal of life, or living like each moment is our last, was something that I carried out that changed his view on the world. And I think mentorship we sometimes think of as this top-down, one-way street. But it's such a beautiful, powerful thing. Because for one, in one way, like believing in someone more than they believe in themselves can unlock so much potential. And you as a mentee also have the ability to shape your mentor as well. So why neurosurgery? So I come to Harvard Medical School and I'm like, I'm going to be a surgeon, just anything but neurosurgery. I mean, I don't really know much about the brain. Everyone seems really intense. And it's just a bunch of guys with big egos, right? So I decided that was a little biased and wanted to test it out. So I sent a cold email to this guy. He's sitting in the audience today, Bill Gormley. And Bill is this charismatic neurosurgeon, very gregarious. He's done Ironmans. When I met with him in his office, he was running on a treadmill desk. I'm like, who is this guy? But he said to me, Faith, this is great. I'll help expose you to all neurosurgery has to offer. And if you decide you don't want to do it, that's fine. But at least it'll be an informed decision. And Bill grew into more than a mentor. He grew into a friend and a sponsor. And he enabled me to give talks all over the country, really all over the world. This is us starting a trial in London. And he even got me into Ironman. But he helped introduce me to the operating room, and that's really where I fell in love with neurosurgery. So this photo is actually me, on the left there. But I'll use it to kind of illustrate what I saw. So I walk into the OR, and the surgeons are tinkering around in the brain. And it's a young woman who has a brain tumor near her language center. And the wild thing was, she was awake and talking. So I was listening to her count, 1, 2, 3, and then it stopped. I was like, oh no, did they bag the language center? Like, what's going on? But then the surgeons removed the probe, and she began speaking again, 4, 5, 6. And what they were doing was temporarily numbing certain areas of the brain so that they could understand where her language was and take out the cancer safely. And to me, this blew my mind. Not only were they trying to preserve quantity of life by removing the cancer, but preserving her identity and quality of life. And that seemed like an incredible purpose-driven way to spend my career. I also saw that they use all kinds of cool gadgets, like these are augmented reality headsets that we use in the spine, and to put screws in safely, and I was like, wow, this career is pretty fire. So, go back and talk to Bill, and I'm like, all right, I want to be a neurosurgeon. And he's like, great. Now you can keep working with me, but I also want you to work with other people. And I was like, why? I was like, well, I'm not the best role model. And I was puzzled, but he's like, well, I'm a man. And at the time, I was like, why should that matter? But he educated me in something so important in that moment, and what we know as the double-blind problem. So those of you who are HBS students will be familiar with the Heidi Rosen case. But essentially what it is that for, women are often put into one of two boxes. And if you're too warm or gentle or kind, they'll view you as less competent and walk all over you. But if you're too assertive or aggressive, you may be labeled as a witch, and then no one wants to work with you. And he said that I hate this way, but I want you to be exposed to it so you can better navigate it and hopefully change it in the future. So I did. I saw how when female surgeons yelled in the OR, it was perceived very differently than men. I also worked with many positive individuals, but then there was an instance with a female surgeon who was neglecting my emails before a critical deadline. So I literally camped outside her office and sitting on the ground waiting for her, stalking her, kind of. And when she arrived, she just grinned and said, I've been neglecting you. And this was more reminiscent of what is called the queen bee paradox. So for women in male-dominated fields, they often have to survive this gauntlet of challenges, and they accumulate scars in the process. But when they make it there, they often assimilate more with the men and look at other women with fewer scars and put additional roadblocks in their way or bully them. And this is not just in medicine. This article from the Daily Mail said 70% of female executives experience bullying from other females. And this is also not just top down. I've been bullied in my own program, where a female on a team with the rest of men creates a separate group chat and excluding me and then screenshotting it and putting that as an Instagram story. Or saying, let's take a team selfie and then turning to cut me out. And these things are like high school level of drama, right? And you think that when you're 30 years old, you'd be like, this is fine, it doesn't matter. But it's incredible how much that can deflate your confidence. And I really just want to bring this up because I think, it's challenging enough, like the hours, the patient care. For those of you in finance or consulting may feel this as well. And we need to stop seeing other women as a threat. And we need to find ways to empower them. And for the guys, if you see this happening, call it out. Like, if we're working towards gender parity, there's so much more we can do with encouragement rather than competition. And again, the challenges are coming from all sides. So I was told 100 times in med school that you're not to go to surgery. And I was chatting with one of my best friends from med school, Alexandra, who's now neurosurgery in New York, and we're like, is this just us? So we actually surveyed the whole med school and found out that women were receiving additional discouragement from surgery in things related to gender, to age, to family aspirations. And this is coming from all sides. Now, I'll be the first to say that for women, there are biological differences. And as we delay our families for our careers, there are certain things that we have to think about differently than men. And those of you that know me, I went through my own egg freezing in December, and $10,000 out of pocket, all these medical appointments, injections, and a lot of what empowered me to do that was actually talking to some of the other business school students. And I think the more we talk about this and normalize it, it's important to know that this is an option, but also institutions, I think, need to support it. And if we don't have these discussions, then we can't help women get through these challenges. So lastly is the superpower bit. So these gender stereotypes, feminine and masculine, are not confined to your sex, whether you're male or female. But the feminine characteristics of being more passive instead of assertive, or emotional instead of analytical, are something that people often put people in buckets with. But I think we're starting to see how these can be superpowers. So in surgery, these articles came out last August, and a headline is, "Are women better surgeons than men?" And these two studies, one in Canada, general surgery, one in Sweden, showed that female surgeons actually had more patient-centered decision-making. They were more willing to collaborate. They more carefully selected their patients. They also had lower complications. So maybe doing things like a girl isn't that bad. And then, I had my own experience with this. This is my final story, but so 2 years ago I was covering the emergency room as a resident, and it can be kind of a tense relationship with the ER. But they had called me to see a patient, and I was maybe more feminine in my response about saying, thank you so much, I'm more than happy to see them, I'll be right there. And as I hung up the phone, one of my attendings had overheard the conversation. And he's like, Faith, you're being way too nice. The ER should fear you. They should know that you crack skulls, and when you won't get to the ER, you mean business. So I politely disagreed and asked, do you think that would work and land differently for you than it would for me? And to his credit, if a patient is in the ER and they have a brain bleed, I need to be able to walk in and command a room and have the nurses, the younger doctors doctors who were my professors a couple years earlier, all fall in line with my plan so that I can, in the ER, drill into that patient's skull and put a catheter through their brain to save their life. And if I can't do that effectively, then patients could die. But thinking about this double-blind problem and also the role model I wanted to be for my juniors, I still leaned in more to these feminine characteristics of being empathic and understanding to the ER, teaching when I had more time, and trying to pull from both of these sides. And at the end of the year, I received an email from the emergency room, the whole department. And I said, Faith, we've awarded you the Neurosurgery Consultant of the Year award. And I didn't even know this existed. But it was so important because what it showed is that you can be kind and effective. Moreover, that attending who had pushed me to try to use fear more as a tactic and called me. And he apologized and he commended my approach. And I think it opened his eyes, and hopefully others, to the fact you can do things differently. And some of these more feminine traits actually can be superpowers. So, to summarize my take, I think mentorship really matters. Lean into the potential you can unlock by believing in someone more than you believe in yourself. And if you're the mentee, don't disregard the other impact you can have on the mentor. And maybe even thank your mentors tonight after this talk. We need to recognize the double bind, and by naming it and recognizing it, we can break away from it and allow people to just be who they are, as opposed to putting them in boxes. And we gotta stop the girl on girl competition. And lastly, overall, I hope that in hearing my story and how I do neurosurgery like a girl, and really like me, that doing things like a girl, for both men and women, pulling on some more of these feminine characteristics, can actually be your superpower.